Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of session 24 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are still talking about so-called cognitive impressions, also called cataleptic impressions. The Greek term kataleptike means grasping or capturing. So the idea is that there are some impressions that precisely and in every detail capture the world as it is. And they kind of announce themselves as such. So when you have a cataleptic impression, the impression itself tells you that it is cataleptic. The Stoic proposal that there are such impressions is hugely contentious. It is the main point of controversy between the Stoics and the skeptics. You can imagine that if you are a skeptic, you could come up with any number of examples of, why that is a complicated proposal that there are such impressions. You would say, well, what if you are in a dream and it just sort of looks entirely real and precise and so on, but you're dreaming? What if you're hallucinating? And so on and so forth. Or you could say, what if you think you see someone who, your friend, and you don't know that your friend has a twin. And then it turns out that what you thought was this really precise and capturing impression of, a person that you see and you think it's your friend. And then it turns out that it's the twin. So you can imagine that once that kind of discussion gets going, counterexamples and just problematic dimensions of examples can feed into an ongoing process of the Stoics, again and again refining how they describe cataleptic impressions, and the skeptics coming up with further and further problems for them. Your homework assignment for today is to take a side here and to decide whether you think the skeptics have the better arguments or whether you think, no, the Stoics are putting their finger on something that is really fundamental to the way we relate to the world, namely that some of our impressions simply tell us, like, this is how the world is. And that is such an ordinary thing to say. The Stoics also don't think that that is a huge achievement. They think all of us have these cataleptic impressions, and they are actually quite ordinary. So, say if you look at your cup of tea that is standing in front of you on your desk, then typically, if there are no impediments, if you have good viewing conditions, it is going to be a cognitive impression, cataleptic impression. And the Stoics think that that, as it were, grounds our relation to the world, and it grounds more elevated epistemic achievements. So you might think, well, that's a really ordinary assumption. I'm on the side of the Stoics. Or you think, no, there are all these problems with it. I'm on the side of the skeptics. So the assignment is to take a side, but also to say which of the arguments persuades you specifically. For the rest of this recording, I want to highlight just one of the exchanges, and the whole series of exchanges is on your handout. And the bit of the controversy that I want to focus on flags something that is a really fundamental dimension of Stoic philosophy, and that is that the Stoics are what is called highly systematic philosophers. For them, epistemology is not a separate discipline. Rather, it is deeply integrated with how they think about the world, our knowledge of the world, the study of nature, and what they call physics. So the step that I want to focus on, the step in this debate between Stoics and skeptics, is that the skeptics say, well, suppose there are twins, or suppose there are a lot of eggs. Say you are on a chicken farm and you look at all the eggs. Couldn't it easily be the case that you mistake one egg for the other egg, one chicken for the other chicken, one twin for the other twin? And in response, the Stoics say, well, but every item in the world every individual differs from every other item in the world. So the epistemological challenge that comes from the skeptics, whether we couldn't mistake highly similar items for each other, prompts a theory in physics or metaphysics, and that theory says that there are no two identical objects in the world. And I want to invite you just to think about that for a moment, whether you think, well, actually, that is a really interesting, perhaps even intuitive proposal, that ultimately everything in the world, at least in minute ways, differs from everything else in the world, or whether you think, no, that is just hugely implausible. Is it really going to be true that grains of sand all really differ from each other? Or are there going to be at least two grains of sand that don't differ from each other? So the epistemological discussion pushes the Stoics into innovation in physics, where they try to defend the very ambitious claim that there are no two identical objects in the world. And then, of course, the skeptics say in response, well, to some extent, we just don't care. Maybe there are no two identical objects in the world, but they could appear to be identical. And for us, for the skeptics, who are worried about mistaking one thing for the other, that is enough. So, to return to your homework assignment, you don't have to focus on this bit of the exchange. I mention it only, or I talk about it in a little more detail only in order to illustrate that really each step in this discussion is very rich and reaches out to fundamental premises in other domains of Stoic philosophy. The job for you is to identify one step in this debate that you find particularly interesting, whether it is about identical objects or about dreams or hallucinations or whatever, and hone in on that and explain whether you take the side of the Stoics or the skeptics and why.